Welcome to the Fennell Shooting Podcast. Fueled by Fiocchi, the industry standard that champions trust. If you're a clay target shooter, then we have something for you. Speaking with some of the best in the industry about the game you're passionate about. Follow us at the Clay Lab on YouTube and Spotify. The Fennell Podcast is also brought to you by the Clay Lab, Ranger, Krieghoff International, Briley Manufacturing, Long Range, Rainier Shotgun Sports, Mech Outdoors, Greenwood Custom Stocks, Electronic Shooters Protection, and Westside Sporting Grounds. Here's your host, Will Fennell of the Fennell Shooting School.
I got my good buddy Anthony Matarese on. Anthony's probably one of my longest term friends in this game. We both started about the same time, even though he's a bit younger than me. And you ready to go, Anthony?
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So got your newsletter. If y'all haven't signed up for Anthony's newsletter, you really need to. There's always lots of info packed in it. You got a lot going on, man. Books and videos and interviewing digweed. World championships. Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I'm always pretty busy, but just kind of if I summarize my newsletter from the top to the bottom, we had our fourth kid last year. I have four kids now. My first boy. I think we're done with that. Keeps me busy right there. I had a reasonable year shooting. I shot well. Didn't perform as well as I wanted to when it counted the most. Consistently felt like I shot great and missed a few targets throughout the season that, kept me from being on the podium or winning some things. Still had some decent performances. Last year, I did some filming with George Digweed. We released a roundtable just recently and then for free. And if you haven't watched that, it's worth watching.
By the way, that is worth the time to sit and listen to.
Yeah, so
it was really good.
We had the opportunity to film that while we had all the highest quality cameras, et cetera, that we were using for some videos that he's got some individual videos that he's made. And then we made a video together. So I had that going on and I helped through the editing processes with that stuff. I'm writing another book for hunters. I released my book a couple years ago. It was pretty successful at releasing a book called Straight Shooting for Hunters with Will Primo, who's been in the outdoor space for a long time. And he actually read my book and asked me to do a book with him. So that was kind of
that's awesome.
That was kind of an honor to do that. Launched a new website with my partner, Chris Claxton, to host all these videos that were instructional videos and stuff that we're doing, which the website has, we've put a blog on there with a lot of articles and there'll be more articles coming. So it'll be interactive. People can go look and read some good articles on shooting. So that's a good place to go and draw some people to our website and see what we have, but there's some good articles there. Very busy with my shooting school. Added a couple associate instructors working with me to help out on, with some of the new people coming in the game that can't necessarily get in with me. So a lot going on, but all good. Looking forward to the 2024 shooting season and glad to be on here with you today, Will.
Yeah, man. Yeah, you stay busy. That's one thing about Matarese. There's no dust settling under your feet. You're constantly on the move. That's for sure. You just got back from fishing in Costa Rica?
Yeah, we did. Me, my dad, my mom, my wife, and a friend of ours who fishes all the big fishing tournaments with us. We went down and fished. We went in Los Sueños on the Pacific side in Costa Rica. We fished 3 days, hung out a couple days, fished with a friend of ours on their boat, the Bill Fisher. It's a Duffy Boat Works. They're a new builder, but family's been in fishing for a long, long time. And we fished 3 days. We had some really good sail fishing. We had 20, 30 sail bites a day.
Wow.
And catch a few mahis. And one of the guys the guy that fished with us came down. He fishes all the big tournaments with us, but he's kind of a little bit of a novice in regards to, hook and fish himself and, learning how to handle that. It's definitely a feel to it, similar to shooting, really. How to have confidence to to hook a fish with, feeding him a bait. And so one of the reasons we wanted to get him down there was to get him some experience and
A lot of practice in a short amount of time. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a really good time. And if you're ever looking for a place to go on vacation, that's a place I would definitely recommend.
Cool. So, kind of some of the meat and potatoes of the podcast we were going to talk about. You brought up a great idea, which was kind of us talking about how we started in the game as far as shooting technique goes. We both got instruction early on from Dan Carlisle, was our mentor in those days, and how that's evolved over the right at 30 years we've been doing this, and how the game evolving has kept us evolving and working together on all this. So your thoughts?
Yeah. So I guess I had my first lesson with Dan in 1996. So we were just talking about it before we got started. So, almost 30 years ago, 28, I guess, 28 years, 27, 28 years ago. And, from 1996, I just started. 97, had some more lessons with Dan. And then 1998, he moved to a range in Pennsylvania as the general manager slash shooting pro. And then I had lessons regular, probably twice a month for a couple of years until he moved back to Texas.
I came up there and went to that place a couple times. What was the name of that club?
The club was originally called Twin S and then changed names to Water and Wings. And eventually at the very end, before Dan moved to Texas, he was at Lehigh Valley Sporting Clays for a little bit. But anyway, that was an hour and a half from my house. I would go up there and shoot with him probably twice a month for a couple of years.
Yeah. So you had a lot of time with him.
Yeah. So I probably had 25 lessons a year for 2 or 3 years. Okay, yeah. Something like that.
That's a lot of shotgun shells with Dan Carlisle.
Yep. When he moved to Texas, I want to say I was about 15 or 16 probably 16 when I moved to Texas, when he moved to Texas. And from then I pretty much had the fundamentals that he taught me and took it from there on my own.
Yep.
And I maybe saw him once or twice in the next 20 years,
yeah.
But
same kind of
called him on the phone and asked him a question here and there, but pretty much the fundamentals that he taught me, I kind of ran with from there and did the best that I could with what I knew. And I felt like, over the years, what I realized is I never really deviated drastically from the fundamentals. Certain things Dan taught me: kill the bird where you see it the best, keep your eye on the target, be in sync with the target, be in control with the target, match the target's speed. Those fundamentals hold very true to everything I believe today. I think where I've made changes over the years is basically figuring out what works better in certain instances, right? So like when I was a kid, Dan was not big on stance and mount and, this is how you're supposed to mount the gun, this is how you're supposed to stand, et cetera. And that's no criticism to him. That's just where we were in the game and what he was teaching, almost 30 years ago. So there's things there that I definitely evolved on my own and learned more and really watch people, right? So I never won the world FITAS as a junior. And there's no question that it's because I didn't know certain things and I was doing certain things incorrectly based upon what I had learned. Again, that's not a criticism, Dan. That's just the facts. Okay. I won the world sporting as a junior 3 times. I won the U.S. Open and the Nationals 3 out of, you were only a junior for 4 years then, 3 out of 4 years, both the U.S. Open and the Nationals, but I never won the World FITAS against the same people because Greg Wolf won it a couple times, et cetera. So I was getting beat in FITAS because I didn't understand how to mount to the lead, okay? Meaning inserting more lead in front of the bird and killing the bird quicker, using my gun mount to kill the bird, understanding more about my mount, so
right.
Those were just things I didn't know. And there's no question, that I learned those things kind of on my own and through trial and error and by watching people that, simply did something better than me, right?
Yeah.
So the fundamentals, though, I don't think I've changed drastically. For example, Dan, and if we had him on the podcast here with us, he would, if I explained this to him the right way, he would agree with me. If I didn't explain this to him the right way, he wouldn't agree with you. Right? If you just say, "Hey, Dan, can you do this?" He's going to say, "Hell no." But if you explain to him in the right context, I think he'll go, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense." So, I learned from Dan, never be behind the target. Okay. And I was never behind the target in my shooting for, I don't know. So I'm coming up on 30 years of competition. I was never behind the target, definitely in the first 10 years. Okay. Never behind the bird. And I was rarely behind the bird in the first 20 years. Okay.
Right. Right.
In the last 10 years, I start behind the bird a lot. Okay. And the key is the speed of the gun and the speed of the bird, which is the thing that Dan has always harped on to me about being in control of the bird, being connected with the bird. That's what matters, right? So what I've
exactly
realized,
where the gun isn't as important as matching the speed.
Yeah. So the reason I was taught not to be behind the target is because if you're behind the target, there's a higher probability that the speed of the barrel can be different than the speed of the bird because you have to catch up to it. Okay. So absolutely, in certain instances, I don't want to be behind the bird. Okay. In certain instances, though, for me, I get more control, more connected, and match the speed better starting in the backside of the bird. Okay. So that's something that if I was standing on the range with Dan today and if I was showing him what I'm doing, say, "Hey, Dan, let me show you this." There's no question he would look over my shoulder and go, "Yeah, you're really in sync with the bird. That's fine." Okay.
100%.
That's actually, he goes, that he would probably say, "Yeah, that looks better than if you stayed in front of this bird."
Yeah.
Okay. There's no question because I can feel it. I can feel the bird slow down. I'm matching its speed. The risk of being behind the bird is that if someone doesn't know what gun control is, then they can get out of control being too far in the back of the target. So I can understand the perspective of where I was taught from. And in general, when I start with a novice shooter, I still do the same thing today. I teach them to stay with the target, not start behind it. Okay?
Right.
Because I think they'll get in less trouble.
And there's behind it, and then there's way behind it.
Yeah.
And then
but at the end of the day, I feel like as the shot is being triggered and you're delivering the shot, the gun speed, look, I spent 5 days with George Digweed this summer, 2 days in England. I flew to England for 2 days just to shoot with him and watch over his shoulder to see what he's doing so that we can put this video together that him and I are doing together, give away the video that we did. And then he has, so him and I have a video that we have for sale, which compares our techniques. He has 2 videos. I spent 5 days looking over the guy's shoulder, shooting thousands of shots. Okay. Most of the time when the guy's gun goes off at the end, he's very much in sync with the bird. Okay. It's very interesting to see the shots comparison video that him and I did together. It's done incredibly well with shot cam, nighttime shooting, flash targets, using a laser, special laser that we had for the gun to show up great at night. You can see what the guy does incredibly well. You can see what I do incredibly well because we compare them. We shoot the exact same shots, compare them. At the end of the shot,
same thing.
His gun speed is not that much faster than mine. In some instances, slower. Okay. So what is the method is he came from behind the bird, but the reason that it works is because the gun speed and the bird speed synchronize towards the end of the shot. There might be some instances where it looks fast to me, okay, but in general, it's not that different than the gun control that Dan would have taught me. And George explains it fairly well in a couple of instances. He said, "Look, so if you're if you're behind the bird and the bird's 50 yards away, okay, you're talking about the difference here of, he uses his hand and shows you, he's like, it's like 5 inches. Okay.
Yeah.
Is the difference here between being in front of it and starting behind it. Okay. So,
right.
5 inches of movement is going to make that much difference. That's kind of one of his ways to explain it, and I think that it goes back to using kind of what works for you to a degree, finding how you evolve for me, my evolution of my technique from what Dan taught me, I would say that I shoot, pull away probably more than any other method, swing through and maintain lead. Okay.
Yep.
I'm probably as versed in techniques as anyone, right? Sometimes that could be a problem if I've got too much to think about, I guess, but I also feel in a lot of instances there's the right tool for the job, right?
Right.
So how did I learn those? How did I watch those? I watch people that do things better than me. If I feel like if you don't have maintained lead in your game for FITAS, you could have a problem, right?
Sure.
I feel like if you don't have some form of swing through in your game, you could have a problem on certain shots. Can you use a one size, fits all approach? Sure, I guess you can. You can use anything that you do well. I always tell people this, right? It's like if you watch something and if you have zero problems in your game and you don't miss anything that you shouldn't miss, okay, then don't change anything, okay? But if you miss something that you shouldn't and you have a trend of doing that, a bird that you don't execute as well as you should, you might want to try something different on that target.
Yeah, exactly.
That's essentially how I got to where I am today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I started with Dan maybe just 6-8 months earlier than you did. I had kind of the same thing when he went to Pennsylvania, like you did when he went to Texas. It's like, oh, damn, I'm on my own now, And of course, I'd still stay in touch with Dan. I'd come see him every now and then and stuff. But, the basics that he taught us have held up pretty strong. The game has changed, and we've kind of had to evolve with it. Remember, gosh, I wish I could figure out the years that he had the big revelation about the 20-foot rule, how we were going to match the speed of the target for 20 feet. And then that kind of evolved into matching the speed of the target until you feel connection and all that kind of thing. The game is if we've talked about on other podcasts before, don't even go into too much detail on it, but the game has really changed.
Right.
And FITAS, which is obviously my passion, and you just were talking about, I think one of the reasons we had to do some things different to master that game is because that really wasn't Dan's game. I mean, he shot a little bit, but
he never taught me, again, not a criticism. It wasn't as prevalent as it is now, and he didn't shoot much FITAS, and I didn't really learn anything from him about FITAS.
No.
So, I figured that out on my own, and you watch guys that could mount and fire the gun really well, like a Greg Wolf, or, Greg Wolf would have been, my age, et cetera, as a peer that I could beat him every time in sporting, not every time, but a lot more times than he was going to beat me, and he would beat me more often in FITAS than I would beat him. There's a reason. Okay.
Yeah.
You could watch somebody, even later years as the game changed. Okay. So Wendell Cherry is a big advocate of being in front of the bird, staying in front of the bird, and having a good gun mount, right? So if he would shoot a bird better than me, okay, I would watch that, okay, and try to build that into my game and learn more about my gun mount and learn more about my timing and learn more about my insertion to the front of the bird. Just because I simply can admit one of my shortcomings, and try to adapt my game to fill that hole. So that's kind of how I added to my game is, by watching, I'll tell you a funny story. When I switched to an over and under, we talk about the game changing and techniques changing, et cetera. When I switched to an over and under, obviously the game didn't change, but my equipment changed.
Right.
I could see around my gun extremely well on semi-auto, one barrel, thin action. You can pre-mount and keep your head in the gun on almost any trap or trap teal or steep riser and still see the bird below the barrel.
100%.
And it was at that point in time one of my strongest shots. It is now probably still one of my strongest shots, but I had a period when I switched to that gun that I really struggled. And the guy that I that I think of has shot that style of target the best over the years, going away, duck trap, double trap, right, is Bill McGuire. Okay. The guy, in his peak of his prime of his shooting, if you think you're going to beat that guy on a going away double trap teal, good luck. Okay.
Yeah.
He shoot them really well, didn't move the gun a lot, see the bird coming, and he would shoot that bird with a soft pre-mount where the gun's in his shoulder, but his head's out of the gun, where he kind of lets the gun fall off of his face and kind of relaxes his shoulder a little bit. So on my DT11, I could not see around the gun like I could on my semi-auto. And I, basically in a very short period of time said, all right, I got to do something different. So I'm going to kind of mimic what Bill McGuire is doing. And I had it pretty much dialed in, would shoot it pretty good in practice, for the most part, but something was missing. Okay. And I just couldn't quite figure out what it was, where I'd all of a sudden just lose it, right? You feel like you got it, then all of a sudden, you're like,
next tournament, you cratered that section.
Yeah. One more pair and then miss the next two pairs. It's like, what the,
yeah.
I just killed, like something's off, right? But I couldn't figure out what it was. I was sitting at breakfast one time I was actually at the World Championship in England. I was talking to John Woolley, okay, who is very far in technique from Bill McGuire, okay, pretty far, about almost as far as they can come,
yeah,
okay, in terms of methods and style. One guy's all pre-mounted. One guy likes to shoot mostly unmounted. Very different, okay, technique-wise. But I was explaining to him, he's asked me, John Woolley's question to me was, how's your new gun coming? I said, pretty damn good. I feel like I shoot crossers better than I do with my auto. I feel like my trap and my quartering is tougher. Okay. Because I can't see. I said, but I've been working on my soft mount like Bill McGuire and on some steep stuff. If it's flat, I can see around the gun and be fine. But on the steep stuff, I'm working on kind of mimicking Bill on those, and I'm starting to get it figured out. I said, but something is just off a hair. I haven't, I don't know if it's my confidence or I feel like something is missing. And John said to me, he said, make sure your head's not moving too much when you're doing that. Okay, he said, just make sure your head's not moving. If you come out of that gun, he goes, make sure you move the gun out of your face and don't move your head up too much. He goes, because if you're bringing your head down at the same time you're bringing your gun up too much, he goes, that could be screwing up your vision. And I was like, okay, thanks. It just kind of, we were just eating breakfast. It wasn't,
Yeah.
We were at a competition, so I didn't have any chance to practice. And, a couple weeks later in practice working on that, there's no question, right? So I shoot a trap teal with my gun out of my face because of mimicking Bill McGuire and listening to John Woolley. Okay. So that's an example of how,
things evolve.
Yeah. Things evolve, and being open enough to do something sometimes a little bit different. Right. I mean, I don't know. My only other option was to do it the way I was doing it and keep missing them. Right.
Yeah. It changes in equipment, changes in style of target presentation, all that stuff can dictate you having to adapt. But I think what you just said is key. You can't be so dogmatic about things that, this is the only way. So that you got to be open to trying other things.
Yeah, I think that, you have to have some base, right? So when you get started, some fundamentals that you believe in, right? So I don't really want to start off a novice shooter and say, all right, what I need you to do is you're going to do a maintain lead on this bird. You're going to do a swing through on this bird. You have to keep it at least till they get their feet under them and maybe say they can hit 80% consistently.
Try to get good at one thing first.
Yeah, exactly. With a, you can have a little bit of tools, but consider them simple tools that exactly when you want to use them, and that's it. Don't try to, master the method of 5 different people, because you become, reasonably well at 5 of them and really well at none of them. Okay.
And it gives you the opportunity to overthink too much on race day.
You got too much to think about. So you got to be able to have a basis that you believe you can add to it from there as you feel competent and confident in what you're doing. And then if you consistently feel like you have a shortcoming, right, that you need to be better at, and then that's obviously technical, but even you can get into the mental game and consider the same thing, right?
Sure.
Because I don't want to do the same thing if something is not working, and this is what I've been doing for a routine or a visualization, then sometimes you change a little bit, right? Or you watch somebody else. There's, again, in that space, there's a drastic variety of what people do, from shooting really slow, shooting really fast, feeling like they're very calculated, looking like they're very instinctive. There might not be the exact answer for you, but if something doesn't work, we got to try different things sometimes.
Yes. Don't be afraid to branch out on practice day to see how you fix a hole in your game.
Yep.
All right, man. Well, Dan, he and I talk about this every now and then, and how we kind of took what he gave us, and it's pushed him. It's pushed him to make changes and do things better too in his teaching. And the game just keeps moving on, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Dan the other day, not that long ago, and he's still out there giving lessons, and I'm extremely busy, and and it kind of goes back to what I said. I mean, there's many things that I do that if someone else said them to him and they didn't say that in the right way, he might say, that's bullshit. You can't do it.
Yeah, he dismisses it right away.
He's pretty, this is the way you do it. He's pretty black and white, right? And I think some of his success, or a lot of his success as a coach, probably came from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to what we said, where you need some kind of a base, so he said, this is what I need you to do. Then you do it over and over with repetition, and you do it correctly over and over with repetition, and you ingrain that, and it gets to your subconscious faster because you shot a lot, you've done it the right way, you're very disciplined. He doesn't give you a lot of wiggle room for what's right and what's
right.
What's right and what's wrong. This is what he wants you to do.
Yeah.
So now your subconscious, gets programmed quicker because it's only doing one thing, right? So he's pretty black and white in that regard. But on the flip side, he's if you explain to him if I was to explain to him some of the things I'm doing today, I think he would agree with all of them.
Sure.
I don't think there's anything. And the reason he would agree with all of them, because most of them are rooted in some basis of what he taught me, right? Kill it where you see it the best, be in sync with the bird, match the bird's speed. Okay. Have control with the target, be looking at the target,
Because if you can master the base technique, let's just, whatever your base technique is, but if that'll take care of 80% of the birds, let's get that squared away first before you
and I think
introduce a little too much information and a little too many things to think about.
Right. And I think that your 80% number is fairly right. So if someone started fairly close to the bird and moved away from the bird, that probably works 80% of the time. Right?
Sure.
Well, okay. The other 20% of the time it'll work. It might just not work quite as well.
80% will cover that. Yeah.
So I feel like 80% of your 80% number is pretty accurate. I think any method will work pretty well for 80% of the birds, assuming you have some form of synchronization of the gun and the bird. Okay?
Right.
It goes back to that. No method works if there's not synchronization and correlation between the gun and the bird. Inherently, I think that's where a lot of people's flaws are, meaning that if they're working with someone and they say, I'm using a maintain lead, I'm always in front of the bird, I'm always, never behind it, I don't want to open my lead up, I want to start with my lead. If they have struggles, sometimes it's not the method, okay? It's that they're not actually doing it well, right? So they have a lack of consistency with the gun and the bird, what the gun and the bird are doing together. If someone is starting closer to the bird and moving off of the bird to establish their lead, again, sometimes it's not the method, it's the consistency that they have.
The implementation,
bird speed. So I think 80% is a good number that you could probably use any method and do well with 80% of the birds. The other 20% you'll hit, but there might be a better way for you. Okay.
Right. Right.
That gets a little bit tricky, et cetera, finding what that is or who's going to teach you that, but I think that that's where the base part comes in, but then that's where understanding, it's no different than, whether it's, again, we're talking technical there, but you have to have some form of willingness to recognize your shortcoming to fill that gap, and I'm a firm believer in the number one thing that you do is you find who is better at that shot than you. Okay. So I've mentioned multiple names of people on here that I've learned things from over the years by watching and looking. Okay. And some of those people, I never even talked about it with them, but I just watched them. I never told Bill McGuire that I'm going to use your method to learn to shoot trap teal, but I shot with him. I never told Wendell Cherry when I watched his gun mount when he had a, shooting feed test with me and mounting to the lead and killing a bird that I'm going to 15 years ago or 20 years ago that I'm going to add that in my game. But I realized he shot a certain shot better than I did. So I took that note home with me. Right?
Sure.
All the way to spending 5 days this past summer with George Digweed. George Digweed, in my opinion, is the classic example that the guy, that's why I think the content that we've put out is very useful, both the mental stuff and the technical stuff. He's a classic example that no one's really understood what he's done. Okay. What people have always said, people are like my peers. Okay. And your peers will, what people have said about George Digweed of why he's so good. Oh, he's a, freak of nature. The guy's just unbelievably talented. He's this, he's that, he's, grew up doing it, all of the basically, the problem with all of those answers is no one can be you. Number one, it's a good excuse for why he's better than you. Okay.
Yeah. You can't overcome that.
That's the
right?
number one. That's the number one reason why people say that. Okay. Because it's easier to say that than saying the guy beat you for the last 30 years. Okay.
And still apt to do it still. Yeah.
Right. I don't accept that answer though. Okay?
Me either.
So I don't believe that. Okay. There's something the guy is doing better than everyone else. Okay. And that's partly what we, tried to work on with some of these videos, and I spent time to try to get that out. And there's things I'm going to do different in 2024 than I did in the last 30 years. Okay. And I guarantee you in the next 10 years, I'm going to be better than I was in the last 10. Okay.
Absolutely.
And some of that is from listening to the guy and how he talks and what he says. Okay. And maybe adding some things in my planning or my routine, or changing even, some things in my form. Okay. He said some things to me. I asked George Digweed, I said, this is completely different than anything I've ever thought. Okay. And I've been doing this a long time. Okay. I said, George, when you set up your feet, where's your weight? Okay. He goes, on my back foot. Okay. So I go, all right, well, to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say that they start with their weight on their back foot. Okay. So now I'm not going to instantly go out and put all my weight on my back foot. Okay. Because that's not what I've done. But I'm also not dumb enough. Okay.
To not listen.
Not think about what the guy just said, to add that into my game somehow. Okay. To make my form better. I've always struggled. Personally, I've struggled with my stance and my form and my gun mount in some capacity my whole shooting career, because when I was a kid, I didn't really learn a certain way to stand, et cetera. So I've basically worked that out through the years, but it's always been something that I've had to get better at. I still start off the season worrying about where my weight is and standing. And, then I see a picture of myself in the middle of the season. I'm got the gun mounted too low on my shoulder and I'm leaning too far forward. Okay. Well, if the guy has something to say that I think is, probably valuable, I don't need to take every single piece of what he said, but I'm not going to throw it away and discount it, So I think that simple part is the statement that I would give people is, find your weakness, find someone who does that better. Okay. Study that one little part. People invest a lot of time and energy into our sport, right?
Yeah. Crazy amounts. Yeah.
Medium amounts of time, energy, etc. So a little bit of education and finding one little piece, can definitely be valuable, right? If you always missed a certain shot, then find the guy or the method that works the best on that shot and add that into your game. You don't have to change your whole method. If you're a novice, I'm also advising you not to learn 4 methods at one time.
Exactly.
Learn the one.
And I'm just afraid that that's what happens all too often.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's a, right now, look at the year that Brandon Powell had last year, right? So now everybody wants to come from behind the target.
Every lesson starts off with, what do you think about coming from the back edge?
Right. So
that
there's a use for it. Okay. And if that's what the person wanted to do and that was their base approach, fine. I'm not going to tell them it's not possible. The thing that is always, you have to, I personally believe, if you want to have credibility in what you're talking about, the first thing you can't do is come out and say that something that works and is proven to work really well doesn't work. Okay?
Exactly.
That's a good way to be credible, in my opinion.
Quick way to look like an idiot, right?
So you just have to put it in the right context. You have to put it in the understanding that your mental game is partly contingent upon how strong your subconscious is. Okay. And how often and repetitively you do the same thing over and over correctly, okay, is going to determine how strong, how quickly your subconscious develops strongly, So the book, The Talent Code, The Talent Code, by Daniel Coyne, the guy used the analogy, if you do the same thing over and over, it's like driving your truck or your tractor through a muddy field on the same tracks. Well, the tracks get deeper and deeper and deeper. And eventually when the summer comes and the spring mud hardens, you're stuck in the tracks, right? So he uses that analogy that under pressure, we can deviate and our brain can make bad decisions and do the things we didn't want to happen. But the more you've driven in the same tracks, as the analogy, the more you're stuck there. So you're more likely to just do what I think that analogy holds true if we're talking about variations in technique and methods. And, so is there a place? Yeah. Is there a risk? Yeah. But that's anything in life, right?
Sure. So Anthony, that's a big mouthful, a lot for people to chew on there about technique. And I think we could be doing a big service to a lot of up and coming shooters if they will understand that they really kind of need to, I don't want to say master, but at least get control of one method before they try several different things.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. Go back to what I said earlier. I didn't come from behind the bird for the first 15 years, 10 years anyway, of my shooting for sure. Definitely the first 10 years. I didn't even consider it because I just did what my coach told me to do. So I started to add things to my game when I felt like I had a shortcoming on that shot relative to my peers or relative to what I felt like I could do. So I think that's a good way to, get a good base in your game. I don't care what it is. Okay. Get a good base on your game. I have people come to me that have had 20 years of lessons with somebody different and a different method than I use. And I look at their game all the time and go, man, the guy looks freaking awesome. Okay. But he can't hit a quarter and bird worth a damn,
Right.
So we're going to teach him what to do here, and if I teach him 2 shots and he adds it to his game, great.
Puts 5-6 birds on his score on average round. Yeah.
I don't care what it is. Get good at something and what kind of work the other stuff in.
All right, man. We'll put in the video, we'll add in contact info, the new website. for people to get in touch with you. And I really enjoy doing this, buddy. I'd like to do it some more. Matter of fact, folks, look for a follow-on video to come out, or that podcast to come out shortly about another subject with Anthony we'll be talking about soon. All right, everybody, take care, Anthony, and I'll talk to you later, bud.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks for joining us. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify to the Clay Lab. That way you never miss an episode. We'll catch you here next time on the Fennell Podcast.